Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Ringside Cinema. I am Money Mike, and as we draw ever closer to Survivor Series, the question now is, who will be the fifth member for Roman and the OG Bloodline? Because, as we saw on SmackDown this past Friday, Solo Sikoa had a big surprise, pun intended, as Big Bronson Reed is officially the fifth member for their team. And yes, I am well aware that Raw and SmackDown this week are taped. They've been, they did 2 tapings for each show last week. I have not seen any spoilers, so what I'm going off in this video is just kind of my opinion, my theories, what they might do with this fifth member. And so when we go back to how SmackDown ended, Roman Reigns was in his locker room and he picks up his phone. He tries to call Paul Heyman. He does the thing that Paul Heyman would do. Call the wise man. So it would call, and of course the phone number was disconnected. I don't know, Paul Heyman forgot to pay his bills. Obviously, if you know wrestling history, you know that's kind of a thing. But also the fact that Paul Heyman had his phone destroyed by Solo Sikoa so that he couldn't contact Roman Reigns might actually be why Roman couldn't get in contact with Paul Heyman. But either way, that was a very big cliffhanger as we do head into Raw and SmackDown. We are over a week away from Survivor Series, and again, I have not seen any spoilers, so this is just my theory on who may be the fifth man for the OG Bloodline. And obviously, let's first start with Seth Freakin Rollins, right? A lot of people are going to assume Big Bronson Reed, who is feuding with Seth Rollins, being on Solo's team for War Games means that it's going to be Seth Rollins. And I'm not quite sure that's the case, because that might just be a swerve to make us think that it might be Seth Rollins, but it's not. And when I get to my other candidates, I'll explain why in a minute. When Seth Rollins was recruited by Sami Zayn, Seth Rollins said he never wants to work with Roman. He doesn't want to team with him. Basically, these last 10 years or so has basically fractured the whole relationship between Seth and Roman. And in theory here, a reunion of Roman and Seth finally putting things aside and coming together as reunited, so to speak, is essentially would be a love letter to the fans who have watched the last 10 years or so and has watched everything that has happened with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins over these last 10 years. And the fact that Seth Rollins was essentially the reason for Roman Reigns losing the championship at WrestleMania, because Roman Reigns made a choice. He could have hit Cody Rhodes with the chair, or he could have hit Seth Rollins. But his hatred for Seth, the fact that 10 years later he could not let go of what happened when Seth broke the Shield up, and he chose to hit Seth Rollins in the back with a chair, which ultimately cost him the championship to Cody Rhodes. Roman Reigns is not going to be happy wanting to team with Seth Rollins either. So the idea that these two reuniting, coming back together, and being friends again, yeah, that's a hell of a freaking story. That's a story that needs like a year or two of build up to them two realizing that maybe they do need each other and that they can be friends, that they can put their differences aside. But in this case, with it being rushed, I don't think that it would be a good idea. Let's talk about CM Punk. Because we know on Raw, when CM Punk came out after Hell in a Cell, CM Punk came out and he said, hey, he's going to go away for a bit. He's going to get healed up. And then there was that face-to-face with Seth Rollins. Now, obviously, these two are on a collision course, likely for WrestleMania. So, the idea that Paul Heyman is able to work out a deal to bring CM Punk over to team with the OG Bloodline. Not only does this work from a story perspective, because if you remember, CM Punk was essentially off limits to Solo Sikoa, according to Paul Heyman. When CM Punk showed up on SmackDown, Paul Heyman said to Solo that CM Punk was off limits and to not interact with him, do not try to fight him because of Paul Heyman's friendship with CM Punk. Roman Reigns made sure that CM Punk was not an enemy. So, was Roman Reigns trying to call Paul Heyman to get a deal worked out to bring over CM Punk as the fifth member? Now, you gotta think, CM Punk has been gone throughout this whole Bloodline storyline. So CM Punk is the one guy on the roster that hasn't had to deal with the Bloodline. He has really no issues with any of them, except for Solo's Bloodline, who tried to attack him when he was on SmackDown. Paul Heyman making the phone call to bring CM Punk over as the fifth member makes a lot of sense. Plus, if you really think about it, and you parlay that into the whole feud with Seth Rollins turning down Roman Reigns, and only for him to see the guy he does not like, other than probably the second most hated guy second guy he hates the most, next to Roman Reigns, be chosen as the fifth member after he turned them down. That's perfect storytelling. That's storytelling 101, and that leaves a door open where, we think maybe The Rock will cost Roman Reigns, will cost the OG Bloodline the match. He'll finally be revealed as the mastermind behind this new Bloodline. But in reality, Seth Rollins, who is frustrated, who's angry the fact that CM Punk was chosen after he turned down the offer to team with Roman, that would be all the reasons for Seth to cost Roman and the OG Bloodline the match at War Games. Even though he doesn't like Bronson Reed, he hates Roman and Punk than Bronson, so he would actually be costing them the match out of hatred, and this could be how you turn Seth Rollins heel. In all of this, for the rivalry and the feud with CM Punk for WrestleMania, this is how you turn Seth. Because again, I think if you were to do Seth versus CM Punk at WrestleMania, where they're both baby faces, I don't think that would work. I think fans, they're not ready to boo CM Punk, and I think you got to do something where one of them has to turn, and I think it has to be Seth. And I think this is the perfect scenario where CM Punk, all the history of Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman was his manager when CM Punk had that 434-day reign. Everything coming full circle here in WWE in 2024. And then on top of everything with CM Punk and Seth Rollins, I think you have a good story fit for Survivor Series where everything can continue on Raw with Seth. You know, Jay and Sammy are over there, so they can kind of have a fight with Seth over costing the match, blah, 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 while Roman can still deal with Solo and eventually The Rock later on. But what if there was another Paul Heyman guy that perhaps one that we haven't seen in over a year? Perhaps one of Roman Reigns' biggest and most fearsome rivals in Brock Lesnar. What if, in all of this, after everything that Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar have been through, Brock Lesnar returns as the 5th member of the OG Bloodline to help Roman Reigns win? What if Paul Heyman was able to convince Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns to work together? What if Brock comes back out of respect for Roman Reigns to team with him after everything those two have gone through? What if Brock comes back? We haven't seen Brock Lesnar in over a year. You know, the question I think a lot of people have, and I was going to do a separate video on this, but I figured I might as well talk about it here, is, you know, will Brock Lesnar return? And I think if he is going to return, this actually opens up, this is actually a good way to bring him back, where Paul Heyman would be the mastermind behind bringing Brock Lesnar back into the fold as part of the OG Bloodline. Maybe they just decide, hey, let's bring him back. Fans will pop for him no matter what. Because let's be honest, if the 5th member of the Bloodline is still not known by Survivor Series, and they do what they did with Randy Orton last year, and Brock's music hits when it's time for the 5th member of the OG Bloodline to come out, Vancouver is going to lose its mind. They're going to cheer him. He's going to get a big pop. And you bring back Brock Lesnar. I mean, look at the other side of the equation. Brock Lesnar versus Jacob Fatu is money. That's a money match. Brock Lesnar, Braun Breaker, Brock Lesnar, Gunther. There's so many potential dream matches that WWE can go and say, Brock, come back. Here's all these matches we have for you. And here's some money. Come back. But again, it all depends on how WWE wants to go about this, the whole entire investigation with Vince. Obviously, that kind of ties their hands a little bit. And before we get to the last 2 members that I'm going to talk about here, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, as I produce weekly wrestling content here at Ringside Cinema, and I will be live streaming Survivor Series on November 30th, as we will all find out what will happen when the Bloodline, the OG Bloodline, and Solo's Bloodline meet inside War Games. So hit that like and subscribe button today. I have seen a lot of people say maybe they should debut a new Bloodline member. And yeah, Hikuleo, Zilla Fatu, that would be a quite interesting twist. We've seen Tama, we've seen Tonga, we've seen Jacob debut as part of Solo's Bloodline. But what if Roman Reigns has a trick or two up his sleeve? What if he goes into the family tree and brings in Hikuleo? He brings in Zilla. And it truly is a bloodline civil war. You know, there has been a lot of reports of saying that Hikuleo has signed with WWE, but that they're going to start him out in NXT. And I kind of get it from a standpoint of, maybe you don't want to bring up another member yet. Maybe you want to let them get, trained in the WWE way down in NXT. But I think at this point, we've seen with Solo Sikoa, where Solo debuted, he was down in NXT for a while before he came up and joined the Bloodline a couple years ago. So I could see them wanting to do that route with both Hikuleo and Zilla. I could see that. So I could see maybe having them go down to NXT for a little bit before bringing them up into the Bloodline storyline. But given the fact of what we've seen and what I've just said, we've seen brand new members of the roster go straight from NXT right into the Bloodline storyline. It would be very poetic for Roman Reigns to do the same thing and shock the world, because Tama Tonga and Hikuleo, they're brothers. And so you got that dynamic where you got the brothers on opposing sides, right? So again, I think, to me, depending on how WWE wants to do this, do they want to debut a Hikuleo or a Zilla as the 5th member of the Bloodline? Do they want to have them join up with Roman Reigns in the very same way that we've seen Jacob Fatu and the Tongas join up with Solo? Or is this going to come down to Paul Heyman bringing in a Paul Heyman guy with Brock Lesnar making his grand return after almost 2 years, and maybe, just maybe, CM Punk? Or will we get a mini Shield reunion, and Seth Rollins will agree to team with Roman Reigns because of Bronson Reed being on the other side? I'm not convinced that it's going to be Seth Rollins just because Bronson Reed is the 5th member of Solo's Bloodline. But let me know in the comments below, who do you think is going to be the 5th member of the OG Bloodline? And remember, if you've seen the spoilers for Raw and SmackDown, do not spoil it in the comments. Just leave your guesses below. And ultimately, if I had to make a prediction, and I can't say it's a spoiler, but I'm not Paul Heyman, but if I had to make a prediction, not a spoiler, I think it's going to be CM Punk eventually being the 5th member of the OG Bloodline, with Paul Heyman returning at Survivor Series with the Bloodline once again. I've been your host, Money Mike, and you've been watching Ringside Cinema.
Ringside Cinema, where